Hello everybody, Jim Carey's of Smiles for Cinephiles here again, and today I'm going to talk about Cool Hand Luke, the novel. My first ever video made the case that Luke is an existential Jesus figure. It has had thousands of views now, and loads of you wonderful people out there in YouTube land have taken the time to like, share, subscribe and make comments on this video, for which I thank you. A few people have questioned whether the author Don Pearce or the director Stuart Rosenberg deliberately meant to insert Christian symbolism into this novel and movie. In this video today, I will address this issue and analyse the best of the amazing prose in this classic work of literature. I will begin with the most obvious connections between Luke and Christ. At the very beginning of the novel, on page 2, before Luke has even been introduced, we notice direct parallels to the prophecies of Jesus' coming. And then the miracle. Without even pulling a trigger, a star is being shot out of the sky. Through the bars, we watch it burning, questioning its similarities with this caged world on wheels as the round, pale orbs of our faces are softly illuminated by our own cigarettes. A little later on, Luke's existence. I recognised his heroic aspects long before he arrived at our camp. I sensed his poetry, and I knew that he was coming to save us all. His arrival was heralded well in advance. Again his beard grew. His body and clothes became filthy, his head encrusted with dried blood, his sunburned scalp a solid mass of bruises and cuts. A general description of the tortured Jesus and perhaps a connection to the crown of thorns? Towards the end of the story, Luke has been recaptured. The scene is set. Dead Tree Road, named after an enormous and macabre dead oak tree, blackened from some ancient brush fire, stood in the centre of an open prairie, an isolated giant, its gnarled limbs threatening and spectral. Does this describe the cross? They pulled Luke, each one holding him by an outstretched arm. With a final blow, Luke's head was flung forward. He hung there by the arms, limp, sagging, held up by the trustees, who turned their faces with sickened grimaces, unable to look at him, unable to look at each other. And we stood there, staring up at Cool Hand's body that was crucified against the sky, his bleeding head bowed towards us. This parallel is undeniable. Any word could have been used to describe Luke's position, but Pearce chose to use the word crucified. This is the strongest evidence for a deliberate comparison between Luke and Christ, but there is lots more like it. Luke, as with Jesus, does not die straight away. Sunday was the same thing. Luke dug. The three men hit him and we sang. But at 3 in the afternoon, Luke fell to his knees in front of Boss Godfrey. Interesting that Pearce picks a Sunday. 3 p.m. is also thought to be the time at which Jesus died. Moaning and choking in a beseeching sob, "Don't hit me no more." "You got your mind right, Luke?" "I got it right, I got it right." Luke's will is broken and his spirit is dead. On a number of occasions, Pearce compares the isolation cell, the box, to a coffin. 6 feet long by 3 by 3 wide, Luke spends 3 nights in this cave. But on the 3rd night, from out of the depths of his wooden tomb, we could hear Luke singing. Exactly as Jesus did in his tomb, before his spirit rises again. For Luke, this is marked by his singing, as compared to Jesus' resurrection. Luke is described as a relatable figure come afoul of the authorities, much as Jesus was for his time. This is obvious when Pearce is describing Luke's escape through the black people's village. This compares Luke's plight to Jesus's. He knew that these people would sympathise with him, that they wouldn't care what he had done, nor would they bother wasting time asking what crimes he had committed. They would only see that he was a man who was being persecuted, a fugitive from the same law that had never been on their side. Luke is described in such a way as to have many of Jesus' attributes. His love of truth and toil. You know, I never tell anything except what God loves, and that's the truth. It's a hard world out there. It just is, that's all. His fellow prisoners also worship him. So we wondered, inventing all sorts of fantastic exploits for the glory of his name. An enormous amount of religious terms and phrases are used generally throughout this novel, but just as many are specifically tailored to describe Luke as well. Luke's final escape is described in very telling detail. Now he and Dragline were off in an aureole of flames, a tremendous din echoing behind them. Laughter, curses and screamed invectives raised up in a mixed chorus of soaring hallelujahs. Aureole is another word for halo, specifically a holy glow in classical Christian paintings. This quote is practically verbatim in the film script. A true vision of paradise itself, with three of the angels right there in plain sight, a-playin' and a friskin' round with my boy. Describing Luke's effect. Babalugatz held the magazine, engrossed. Slowly his face would begin to relax, a smile of rapture spreading as he drank in the glory, the beauty and the sanctity of that very private view of the free world. The entire novel is narrated outside of a church, with Dragline preaching the Gospel of Luke. His eyes flitting around the churchyard at the ghosts flickering in the patches of sunlight and shade. The choir was just hitting its stride, beginning to warm up their gospel mood. Accompanied by the background of folk music, Dragline recited the song and the story of Cool Hand Luke. Inside, the choir was still singing, the voices of little kids laughing, swinging through the limbs of a distant mulberry tree. The piano went banging on, the trumpet muted and tremulous, but most of all, we listened to the cunning notes of a sly banjo echoing from deep within the shadowed obscurity. Rattlesnake Road. There was a single word among the whisperings of tools slashing through the weeds and the rattling of chains. Luke. Serpent imagery for the place where evil was committed against Luke. Up ahead of us we could see the church. There was a steeple in front, but it had no bell. Luke, a religious institution, has lost his bell, or his voice. This metaphor describes Luke's affiliation with the religious. The men know that his message is still sounding, even after his death. Waddling through the thick sand of the churchyard towards our dinner, but our faces were solemn as we stood in line, our heads turned towards the small rectangle of weather-beaten cardboard that had been inserted in one of the church windows to replace a broken pane. And as we each bent over our rations, we knelt in a kind of pagan genuflection. This was sacred ground to us, and making us eat here was a deliberate act of heresy, for this was the very spot where they finally caught up with Dragline and his buddy, Cool Hand Luke. The men worship Luke, not as Christ, but in an existential and comparatively pagan way. Before Jackson knew what the hard road was, before he had been tried and sentenced, he had already become a legend to the ball gang, his influence stirring our imaginations and quickening our hearts. We thought about him, ignoring our fate and our time. A unique being, Luke inspires mankind. With his fingers felt the cut on his forehead, a quartet of gospel singers began a vigorous hymn. "O Lord, I'm a-comin' to that angel land." And so Jackson committed his very own crime and was brought before the wrath of the law. He left behind him an anguished chorus of forlorn voices praying over an abandoned city. As in the movie, Luke and the new prisoners are given the rules by which they must live under fear of punishment. Carr laid down the law. There will be no playing grab-ass. The first bell is at 5 minutes to 8 and everyone will get on his bunk for a count, right away. The last bell is 8 o'clock. After that there will be no talking at all. Anyone caught smoking while lying down will spend a night in the box. Anybody who turns in the wrong sheet will spend a night in the box. The building will not look like a Greek whorehouse. Everyone's ass will be covered with shorts or with a towel. No one will sit on his bunk with dirty pants on. Anyone caught sitting on his bunk with dirty pants on will spend a night in the box. Those who drop a bud on the floor or even a match spend a night in the box. If you buy a Coke at the Juke and do not bring the bottle back. If you do any loud talking. If you check out in the morning without taking all your personal junk with you, you spend a night in the box. In the novel, unlike in the movie, Boss Godfrey does actually speak. God-free, or without God, he is still the manifestation of evil. Boss Godfrey hesitated, holding the burning match, his sightless face turned directly towards Luke, who stood there, relaxed and easy, smiling as he looked into Boss Godfrey's glasses. I looked too, but all I could see was the reflection of the flames. Are these the fires of hell? For the rest of the day I tried to stay away from Luke. He scared me. I didn't like his carelessness, his sense of humour, or his sacrilege. Again, more religious terminology. Boss Godfrey, his hat is black. I wondered about Boss Godfrey and the other guards, speculating about their reality as human beings. The other guards have eyes of men, but the walking boss seems to have no eyes at all. In old cowboy films, the villain always used to wear a black hat. Darkness shrouds their head, and no eyes means no soul. Boss Godfrey walked up the road a bit, turned around and leaned on his cane. He stood there watching us, silhouetted against the dawn. The sun rising up behind his body, right up through his head and out of the black night he wore for a hat. All day the sun rose high up into the sky, while we, stripped to the waist, were seared by its burning rays. But we knew that sun was really the left eye of the walking boss, just as his right eye is the moon. Some poetry in the words here. Boss Godfrey is all-seeing. Without aiming, simply pointing the barrel in the precise direction of his will, Boss Godfrey fired. The crane jerked in mid-air, falling with a smooth limp trajectory of white, as though death himself had spoken. This alludes to the devil's power over existence. Behind him stood Boss Godfrey, his black hat outlined on the cloudy heavens beyond, his mirrored glasses catching the full rays of the sun and reflecting them upon us. The eyes of the walking boss became two balls of blinding celestial fire. Repetition of the hanging dark cloud and the burning vengeance motifs. Behind that column came the tall, obscure figure of the walking boss, the man in the black hat, the man with no eyes, Boss Godfrey himself, creating miracles with his stick on a huge grey carpet of sand that unrolled majestically beneath his feet. A couple of points on Luke himself. Just remember, man, wherever you go and whatever you do, always play a real cool hand. And from that night on, he always answered to the name of Cool Hand Luke. And I will always remember Luke, the way he looked that foggy morning, lazily holding a deadly serpent in his hand, its jaw agape and hissing as it twisted and struck at the dim and hazy sun, for that was an exact portrait of the man named Cool Hand Luke. Luke, the sun, wrestling with evil. I kept watching Jackson. There was something in the way he held his head and the way he held his cigarette, and I knew that he would always stay under the gun as long as he was here. He was intelligent and he was unafraid. This meant that the free men would be down on him from the beginning. Not only that, there was that smile. The movie lifts the egg-eating scene directly from the novel, with only some minor differences. This was the family, our true family. There were 54 of us altogether. Again though, Luke consumes the other prisoners' souls. "Here you are, society, number 54. You might as well have this one. You sure did pay enough for it." Listlessly, Society Red took the egg and held it in his hand, sitting there, staring at it, saying nothing. Luke's is the only soul not to be consumed. The rest of the men are saved, but Luke is being kept for something greater. Also, notice that it is society that is left to ponder Luke's soul. By then, Cool Hand Luke had already emerged as the master of the family. Absolute champion. None of us could keep up. Us, a gang of half-naked laughing demons. Luke was right there in the lead. More religious reference. Luke and his banjo are much more prominent in the novel. The instrument is his voice. And that's what the other voices seem to be saying today in the churchyard as we had our beans. They were singing their gospel hymns with a grating energy, a song that expressed as much despair as it did of hope, and put off the whole question of salvation, confining themselves solely to matters of style. Someone was playing a banjo, just like the one that Luke always played. His is a song without faith, concerning the matter of being. We were far more than just amazed. He was a master. Spirituals and mountain hymns, long and complicated virtuoso pieces. He would sit on the floor, cross-legged, feet and chest both bare, his eyes closed and his head tilted backwards. His face underwent a transformation, beginning to assume a glow. The meditation of a Buddha? He became two selves, his hands undertaking a life of their own while the rest of him drifted away. His voice droning as if inspired by some distant source. His voice half talking in a mocking chant that alternated in pitch and intensity and became a kind of song. Is this speaking in tongues? Chanting is also quite important in Buddhism. Being a preacher's son and being one of the good guys, I just naturally had to have me a lot of faith. Music had come into our lives. Luke's music had taught us, and for once all was harmony, just part of a prolonged and complicated hymn. Luke's word is giving them strength, making them able to carry heavy burdens. Luke ignored the blisters and the scratches, the calluses and the heat, decapitating and trampling down those shadow demons that rose up writhing all around him. Exulting in his strength, he defied that sun and the sun god alike. All the while, boss Godfrey was watching Luke. Luke as the leader of men. I sat on top of a big old tank in this here landing craft, and they saw me up there, picking away and not getting shot, and they figured things weren't so bad, so they perked up a little and weren't afraid no more. Later on, a colonel gave me a star, a bronze star, like they make statues with. We listened carefully because we knew that this was the way it was, that when that banjo spoke to us, it was telling us the truth. Luke and his men rolled on, demented by their conquest, their immortality. Again, his voice, his instrument, speaks to a higher truth. Although compared to Jesus, Luke is still just a man. Luke followed behind her, playing a hoedown melody on his banjo. Trying to cover herself with the torn remains of her clothing, she fled from floor to floor. Never missing a note, the soldier who stood in the doorway, playing his fiendish instrument. Then Luke stopped. High on the wall was a huge crucifix, the figure of Christ carved in the crude, macabre style of the Middle Ages, the wood dark and stained, the face gaunt and tormented. Hanging his head, quietly slung his banjo over his shoulders and left the room. Luke commits much more sin in the novel, especially during World War II, but after this encounter he is reminded of morality again. Luke asks as to why he has been forsaken. There was something magical in everything Luke did. He had the devil in him. Sometimes I think he wasn't even human. Luke was mad at God. Again, this scene is almost exactly identical in the movie. The storm drew closer. Hey Dragline, it looks like old man God's getting ready to take himself a piss. You can't talk that away about the Lord. Oh, come on, Dragline. You mean to tell me you still believe in that bearded son of a bitch up there? You're being one of them blasphemer guys. Ain't you scared? If there's really a God like you say, then he can strike me dead right now. Let him prove it. Luke, ain't you scared of dying? Ha! It's living I'm scared of. Make me know you're up there. Dragline shrank away from Luke. Boss Paul, that crazy Luke says he don't believe in no God. Boss Godfrey, his face turned towards the sky, his mirrored glasses reflecting the dark grey clouds of the storm as the lightning beat down on the earth in swift, punishing strokes like the terrible walking stick of the man with no eyes. Boss Godfrey is a reflection of God, his punisher on this existential earth. Existential references. Existentialism in philosophy is concerned with the meaninglessness of existence and being authentic to the self. Meaninglessness in Greek mythology was epitomized by the task of Sisyphus. He was punished for self-aggrandizing deceit by the gods to push a boulder up a hill for all eternity. The one remaining way in which we can still show our defiance of the great golden authority that hovers above us all is to do even more than is demanded, to show our contempt by working faster, better and harder to serve its omnipotence willingly and with inspiration, enjoying it even. Philosopher Albert Camus argued that the only way to combat an existence of meaningless tasks was to do it with a shit-eating grin on your face all the time. Don Pierce and Luke agreed. He had a new sentence, 10 more years, but Luke didn't seem the least bit upset, bearing the weight of his time with absolute cheer. Quite calmly he had told us that there was really no other world but this. Right, that's my whole case. I definitely think the novel is an all-time classic, and if this video hasn't convinced you to read it, then let me know why in the comments. As always, please like and share this video. Consider subscribing, and I can continue to make more content such as this. Until next time, thanks for watching.